So, whether you're just starting out or if you already have extensive experience with oral presentations, Stand and Deliver will take you to the next level of mastery. Let's get started. Literally, since the dawn of civilization, the ability to speak well in front of others has been an ongoing human challenge. This was especially true for the classical civilizations of Greece and Rome. But public speaking ability was also highly esteemed in biblical times, and by Native American tribes, and by the cultures of India and China. Fascinating as it might be, however, our purpose here is not a history lesson. So right at the outset, we're going to introduce 3 key tools for creating a high-impact presentation. These are timeless principles upon which all great speakers have relied, though each has done so in his or her own way. By blending your unique identity with the universal principles we're about to discuss, you can transform yourself into an effective public speaker almost instantly. So please listen closely. What you're about to learn will have a dramatic effect, not only on how you communicate to others, but on how you see yourself as well. The fact is, human beings are talking beings. We start talking when we wake up in the morning and we keep at it until we go to sleep, and some people don't even stop then. But in order to be an effective presenter, you need to understand the major difference between ordinary talking and speaking in public. You need to master certain key skills that create the illusion that your presentation is as personal as a one-on-one conversation. But that illusion is only possible when you've professionalized yourself as a speaker. David Letterman has the ability to speak with virtually anybody, while 10 million viewers are looking in. Yet he's able to make this seem as casual as a break at the office water cooler. Now, you may not think of David Letterman as a great public speaker, but he draws on the same principles that virtually every accomplished speaker has used since ancient times. What are these principles? The first one is actually quite obvious, and maybe that's why so many speakers seem to forget it. It can be stated in a single, very short sentence. Know what you're talking about. Learn the material so well that you own it. Don't just have some expertise in your topic, master it. Be able to fill every second of your presentation with solid content. Once you're able to do that, 90% of your work will be done before you even get up in front of the audience. To make this point, Dale Carnegie liked to invoke the example of Luther Burbank, a great scientist by any measure and probably the greatest botanist of all time. Burbank once said, "I have often produced 1,000,000 plants in order to find 1 or 2 really good ones, and then I destroyed all the inferior specimens." A presentation ought to be prepared in that same lavish and discriminating spirit. Assemble 100 thoughts and discard 90, or even 99. Collect more material, more information than there is any possibility of employing. Gather it for the additional confidence it will give you, and for the sureness of touch. Gather it for the effect it will have on your mind and heart and whole manner of speaking. This is a basic factor in preparation, yet speakers constantly ignore it. Mr. Carnegie actually believed that speakers should know 40 times more about their topic than they share in a presentation. When speakers, especially inexperienced speakers, begin to prepare a talk, their biggest fear is not having enough to say to fill the allotted time. Most people worry that they'll run out of material in the middle of their talk, but they respond to this fear in a misguided way. They puff their presentation. They wind up trying to cram the story of their lives into their 15 minutes at the podium. The presentation gets bigger, but instead of really growing, it just swells. This is an especially dangerous pitfall for new speakers, since it's usually an unconscious process. The principle of knowing what you're talking about doesn't mean you have to say it all. You say just enough to fill your time effectively. You leave your audience wanting more. And if you've truly mastered your subject, they'll know that there is more. You'll project knowledge to them that's above and beyond your actual spoken words. To reach this level of mastery, you should begin preparing 10 days to 2 weeks before the event. Start your preparation by sitting down with a pencil and paper for 20 minutes, no less and no more, and writing at least 50 questions about your topic. 50 is the minimum, but you should definitely try for as many as possible. Write your questions as quickly as you can. Don't give them a lot of thought at this point. That's why the 20-minute time limit is important. This stage of preparation is a sprint, not a leisurely stroll through your mental library. During the first 20-minute session, what you're really doing is creating an outline for your talk, and I want to stress the importance of putting this in the form of questions. Research shows that this is much more stimulating to the brain than a conventional outline, and since you're not supplying answers at this point, it can also be done much faster. The answers will come later in other sessions leading up to your talk. Let me repeat. Your first session should be limited to 20 minutes, and it should be done the old-fashioned way with an actual pencil and paper. Now in your second session, you'll start supplying answers to your questions and providing evidence for your ideas. This is when the computer becomes an essential tool. Begin by creating a document file of your questions. There should be at least 50, and quickly writing an answer for each one based on your own knowledge. Write this just as you would say it if you were sitting in Starbucks with a good friend. Unlike your first session, you don't have to limit yourself to 20 minutes, but don't feel as if you have to answer all of your questions either. Just keep at it until you feel your energy start to fade. And resist the temptation to use the internet to gather information. That will come later. Right now, your job is to access everything you know about your topic, which is probably a lot more than you think you know. It may take you several sessions to answer all the questions you wrote down, but that's no problem as long as you begin at least 10 days in advance. Just make sure that you complete your answers with 3 or 4 days left before the date of your talk. In those final sessions, you can surf the internet for facts and figures to enhance what you've already written. And remember this, you don't have to report everything there is to know about your topic. Ideally, you have total mastery of your subject, but that's for your benefit as much as for the audience. Mastery allows you to feel completely confident in your role as an authority. It's not something you have to demonstrate in the actual words that come out of your mouth. So pick and choose the really pertinent and hard-hitting information that you want to include. Think of your talk as a special meal you're preparing in your home for some honored guests. Don't think of it as a full-service restaurant. Sometimes there will be presentations for which you have little or no prior information. Other times the opposite will be true. For example, if you're talking about your own life or career, you'll already have a wealth of material on the subject. Your problem then is to select and arrange the information. Don't try to tell your audience everything, because it can't be done. Your talk will come off as sketchy and fragmented. On the other hand, if you're talking about something that's less familiar to you, avoid trying to cover this up with excessive research. Just be frank with yourself and your audience about your relationship to the topic. You don't have to say you feel inadequate about it, but you don't have to pretend you're a total expert either. You might want to take only one phase of your topic and enlarge upon it. Don't make your talk an abstraction. Make liberal use of illustrations, personal observations, and self-revelations. Think of specific situations you've observed, and let those situations reveal any general principles. Above all else, your goal should always be to share your authentic point of view with the audience. That may be from the viewpoint of an excited and highly motivated learner, or from an experienced and completely genuine, reliable, and empathic teacher. By showing this is who you really are, you'll capture the goodwill of your listeners. So far, we've talked about creating the content of your talk. Now you're probably wondering how you should organize it to fit the time frame you've been allotted. You're wondering how to configure all that information into a coherent presentation. And if you're like most people, you're especially concerned about making sure you don't suddenly freeze up when you stand behind the microphone. Shouldn't you memorize all or part of what you're going to say? Shouldn't you at least write it out? Let me respond to those last two questions. No, you should definitely not memorize all or part of your talk. And no, you should not even write it out. If you do, the chances are your presentation will sound like you're reading rather than speaking. Later in the program, we discuss organizational templates for talks of various lengths. Those will be valuable tools, but the technique we're going to look at now is something very different. It's the technique of rehearsal. Rehearsing your presentation should happen in two ways, and the first one takes place entirely inside your own head. At the same time as your written preparation is continuing, you should be constantly revisiting, revising, and rehearsing your talk in your mind. That means you're going to be thinking and rethinking your topic for at least 10 days. Think of it when you first wake up in the morning. Think of it some more just before bed. Go over it in your mind while you're eating breakfast. Go over it again if you have a commute to your work. See what new ideas you can come up with, or what old ideas don't seem to be working anymore. All this can be done entirely on your own. Think about your listeners and their expectations. Think also about your expectations of yourself. What are your goals in this presentation? Do you want to inform, inspire, entertain, persuade, or all of the above? Think about the physical setting in which your talk will take place. How big will the room be? How many people will it hold? And how many will actually be present? How much influence can you have on these practical details? For example, it's best not to have a small group of people in a large room, so give some thought to these physical details. Focusing on these issues beforehand will help ensure that your presentation achieves its purpose. In your own mind, clearly identify your subject and your purpose to yourself, and then let the creative process take over. As this process unfolds, you can begin speaking your presentation aloud. The car is an ideal place to do this, but you can also try it at home while looking in a mirror. Get a feel for the timing of your words and sentences. Amend them and refine them, both for their content and for the time that they take. If you're an inexperienced speaker, estimating the time of a presentation can be deceptive. Despite the very common fear of running out of things to say, most people actually have more material than they think. This is better than having too little, but it can also throw off your timing. Presentations almost always take longer to deliver than you think the material will last. But all of this is only one kind of rehearsal. So far, we've been talking about rehearsing by yourself, but you should also be practicing your talk with your friends. You can ask a friend to listen to an actual run-through of your presentation, or you can just brainstorm about your topic. But make this your main topic of conversation as often as you can. Pay close attention to how people react to different phrases and ideas. As you do these live rehearsals, you'll see that a structure begins to evolve. Ideally, this is an organic process, but you'll also want to consciously organize your talk in line with the templates you'll be learning later in the program. In general, keep in mind what experienced speakers call the rule of 3. A simple application of this would mean giving your talk in 3 main sections. Then each section also has 3 subsections. Depending on your time limits, each of these could then have 3 sections and so on. There's something about the 3-part formula that creates a natural flow, and you'll want to take full advantage of that. Your rehearsals will show how important it is to have a strong opening and a strong close. As you'll learn later in the program, there are many tools for getting off to a fast start. But as a general rule, you must tell people what you're going to speak about and what your purpose is. They need to feel that the talk is important to you, and they certainly need to feel it's important to them. That's your first order of business. And at the close, using a stirring quotation or an amazing statistic is always a good choice. Give your listeners something to think about and talk about at the end. Try out different closes in your rehearsals and ask for honest feedback about the effects. Fundamentally, the famous quote holds true. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. When you have structured your presentation along those lines, it will have an opening, middle, and a close. But you're not finished yet. Far from it. We've talked about creating content, and we've begun to explore ways of structuring your presentation. Now we're going to look at delivery. Content and organization are very important, but as Dale Carnegie liked to say, depth of conviction counts more than height of logic, and enthusiasm is worth more than knowledge. If you've ever attended a college debate competition, or even if you've ever listened to an argument between 2 teenagers, you probably noticed one key point. By no means is it always the person with the facts and figures who emerges as the winner. Rather, it's the person who sounds best. It's the person who presents an argument so well that it seems like it must be correct, even if that isn't necessarily the case. So let's give this issue of delivery some serious attention. If you've never spoken in public before, let me give you a hint about a very strong feeling you're likely to have when you try it for the first time. And if you're already an experienced speaker, I hope you'll still pay close attention to what I'm about to say, because I'm sure you'll see the truth of it. You see, the first time you make a public presentation, you'll be using the English language, just like you always do. You'll be using the same words and phrases, but you'll be talking rather than speaking in a professional sense. You'll be communicating information, but you won't be delivering it in a meaningful and powerful way. Dale Carnegie once described a very clear example of this. He was staying at a hotel in England that brought in weekly speakers for the entertainment and education of the guests. One of these speakers turned out to be a well-known British writer, and her topic was the future of the novel. While there was no doubt that she was an excellent writer, it quickly became clear that speaking was not her strong point. She admitted right off that she had not selected the topic herself, and in fact there was nothing about it that she really cared to say. What she'd done was to make some rambling notes. With the notes in her hand, she stood in front of the audience, literally ignoring them, not even looking at them, sometimes staring over their heads, sometimes at her notes, and sometimes at the floor. She called out her words into some primeval void, with a faraway look in her eyes and a faraway ring in her voice. As Dale Carnegie quickly saw, that wasn't a presentation at all. It was a monologue. There was no sense of connection with the listeners, and connection is the essence of effective public speaking. The audience must feel that there is a message being delivered straight from the mind and heart of the speaker to their own minds and their own hearts. So how exactly does that happen? There is a whole category of literature known as oratory or rhetoric, but most of it is useless for our purposes today. Old-fashioned oratory in which the speaker set off all kinds of verbal fireworks just won't work in a contemporary setting. The modern audience, whether it's 15 people in a conference room or 1,000 people in an arena or millions watching their televisions, they want speakers to talk directly and personally. They want a public presentation to have the same intimacy as a private chat. But that's not all they want. Paradoxically, they also expect this intimate exchange to be delivered with considerable force, and that's a tall order. Somehow you have to do something that's quite unnatural, and yet make it seem like the most natural thing in the world. There are programs that will tell you that this is all a matter of getting in touch with your deepest emotions and your strongest feelings. While it's certainly important to care for what you're talking about, the real secret to outstanding delivery is more about the mind than the heart. Creating connection with your listeners is a rational rather than an emotional process. It may seem emotional, and in fact it definitely should, but like any form of magic, what you see is only a fraction of what's really going on. This has always been true of any art form. Masterpieces like Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa or Michelangelo's David appear to be living beings, but they are actually based on a mathematical understanding of human form and proportion. Even stand-up comedy depends on setting up certain rhythms that are as predictable as the chiming of a clock. With this in mind, you can learn a great deal about effective public speaking by adopting a scientifically analytical viewpoint. Once you are confidently in control of this perspective, you'll find that the emotions will take care of themselves. A first principle of high-impact delivery is your conscious choice of which words to emphasize. Believe it or not, the meaning of any English sentence is based on the stress placed on the words, much more so than on the dictionary definition. It's easy to prove this. Just pick any sentence and repeat it several times, each time emphasizing different words. As you can see, the meaning entirely changes. What's more, some versions of the sentence are much more compelling and interesting than others. You can put this rule to work in a presentation. I'm going to read a sentence without giving any of the words extra stress. I have succeeded in whatever I have started because I have willed it. I never hesitated, which has given me an advantage over the rest of mankind. That was uniform stress, because none of the words were emphasized. The passions and viewpoint of the speaker weren't really communicated. Now, I'll read it again, this time emphasizing key words. I have succeeded in whatever I have undertaken because I have willed it. I have never hesitated, which has given me an advantage over the rest of mankind. Notice, for example, how stressing the word never brings drama to the sentence. The emphasis on never hesitating actually suggests that there has in fact been a struggle against hesitation. It even implies that that struggle is still going on. If it weren't, why would there be such energy placed on the word never? The point is, the stress you give to words is where the meaning of the sentence really comes from. By the same token, if you stress every word the same, the meaning can diminish or even disappear. So as you rehearse your presentation, try different variations of emphasis to get exactly the effect you want. In addition to changing the stress you give to words, you should also vary the pitch of your voice. Stress is a matter of loudness or softness, but pitch is a quality of tone. In conversation, the pitch of our voices naturally flows up and down the scale from high to low and back again. This is perfectly natural and the effect is pleasing. Why is it then that once people get up in front of an audience, their voices become so dull and monotonous? The answer is twofold. First, they're tense or even frightened, which tends to flatten delivery. And second, they're not aware of or in control of the fact that this is even happening. Once again, the solution is to make your tone a conscious choice rather than an unconscious process. When you find yourself talking with a monotonous pitch, and usually it will be a high one, pause for a second and say to yourself, "I'm not speaking like I normally speak. I've lapsed into the constricted tone of an inexperienced presenter. Verbally, I need to get back to who I really am." In addition to stress and pitch, the speed with which you talk is a hugely important variable. To make this point, Dale Carnegie quoted this passage from a biography of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln would speak several words with great rapidity, come to the word or phrase he wished to emphasize, and let his voice linger and bear hard on that phrase. Then he would rush to the end of his sentence like lightning. He would devote as much time to the word or two he wished to emphasize as he did to half a dozen less important words following it. So many effects can be achieved by varying the speed of your words. Suppose, for example, you were to say $30 million very fast, as if that were a trivial sum of money. In fact, it may actually be a trivial amount in some corporate boardrooms or congressional hearings. $30 million is dashed off as if it were nothing. But now say $30 million, extending every syllable to the maximum. Now it really seems like a lot of money. By increasing the time you took to say it, it's almost as if you've increased the amount itself. Yet the actual words you've spoken are just the same. By now, I'm sure you're beginning to see that high-impact speaking is within the reach of everyone, as long as you're aware of both the obstacles and the tools for removing them. Getting you started on that awareness has been the purpose of this first session, and we've covered a lot of ground. We've introduced the basics of preparation, emphasizing the power of a questions and answer outline to create mastery. We've mentioned the usefulness of computers and internet research, and also the need to think independently of those technologies. We've spoken about rehearsing your presentation out loud, both with your friends and with yourself as the only listener. Finally, we've seen how technical variables such as emphasis, pitch, and speed can enhance the power and meaning of a presentation. These are all very important concepts. If you were to really master them all and put them to work, you would become an extremely effective public speaker even if you listen no further into this program. Yet we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to learn about public speaking, and the benefits of learning it are so great that I know you'll want to move ahead as soon as possible. Remember, no one knew more about public speaking than Dale Carnegie, and nowhere will you find more of that knowledge than in the program you're listening to right now. So please join me for Session 2, in which you'll see why being a high-impact speaker is first and foremost a matter of just being yourself. Welcome back to Stand and Deliver, the definitive program on public speaking, brought to you by the Dale Carnegie Organization and Nightingale Conant. Here in Session 2, we'll be discussing concepts that are the foundation of all effective speaking. One of these concepts, in fact, may be the foundation of personal effectiveness in any form, and it can be expressed in just 2 words. They're the same 2 words that were engraved above the entrance to the School of Philosophy in ancient Greece, and they've been the basis of all wisdom ever since. The 2 magic words are these: know thyself. Because the truth is, Until you understand who you really are, you can't really understand the world around you, and you certainly can't be an effective public speaker. To see what this means, let's consider the two men whose work made this program possible. Their names, of course, were Dale Carnegie and Earl Nightingale. Both men were outstanding public speakers, but they earned that distinction in very different ways. Dale Carnegie grew up on a farm in Missouri. His speaking style reflected his down-to-earth Midwestern roots. Though he was obviously intelligent and well-read, he looked and sounded like a neighbor from across the road rather than a professor or a politician. This was who he was, and this was what he sounded like. Earl Nightingale, on the other hand, was gifted with a voice like an Old Testament prophet. For more than 30 years, his daily radio broadcasts captured the attention of millions of listeners, partly because his voice simply could not be ignored. He sounded like wisdom personified. Earl Nightingale had a completely different speaking style than Dale Carnegie, but it worked equally well because it expressed his authentic self. I don't think there's any need to dwell on this point. I'm sure you understand the benefits of being your natural self when it's your turn to speak. But what you may not understand is who your natural self really is. That's why knowing thyself should begin with some clear-eyed self-appraisal. How, for example, would you describe your personal style of interaction with other people? Are you a naturally reserved person who prefers to let others take the conversational lead? Or are you more outgoing and accessible? Are you an analytic, logical thinker? Or do you like to tell stories and anecdotes to get your ideas across? How would you describe your physical appearance? Are you a large, gregarious person in body and in voice? Or are you someone who doesn't immediately attract a lot of notice? A good way to approach these questions is by identifying some well-known speakers that you admire. Without a doubt, Dale Carnegie and Earl Nightingale were great, but part of the reason was that their speaking styles were perfectly in sync with their time. The Dale Carnegie organization is successful because it stayed on the leading edge of learning and training techniques. You should do the same in finding your role models for public speaking. We'll be talking about Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln in these sessions, and we'll also be talking about Bill Clinton and Jerry Seinfeld. Which of these personalities do you want to use as the basis for your speaking style? Which of them do you not want to use? How can you take what you admire from one speaker and blend it with what you admire from another, with the goal of making your own style entirely unique and original? There are no right or wrong answers to these questions. In responding to them, the only mistake you can make is not being frank and honest. That's the good news. The bad news is almost everybody makes that mistake. You see, when people have to get up before an audience, their self-perception can be fooled by two very deceptive emotions. The first one is hope, and the second is fear. The second of these is certainly much more common than the first, but let's start with a look at how expecting too much can undermine your talk just as much as worry and anxiety. The fact is, some people have been waiting all their lives to stand up and show the world how interesting they really are. If you're one of those people, that's great, because I have no doubt that you really are very interesting. I'm certain that you have some great things to say, and that people will benefit from hearing you. Nevertheless, it's still important not to take your audience for granted. Yes, they want to hear you. More importantly, they want to like you, but they also want you to earn their interest and their affection. They want you to win them over. Even while they're listening to you with rapt attention, they want to know that the focus is still on them. So if you just can't wait to get behind that microphone and start talking, congratulations, that's a good feeling. But you should also take just a half step back to remember a key principle of all Dale Carnegie training. That is, people's favorite subject is always themselves. Your task is to balance your own positive and healthy self-perception with the self-interest of your audience. Let's look at a real-life example. Former President Bill Clinton is a truly outstanding public speaker and a really excellent example of how to be yourself in front of an audience. He's especially effective in question and answer sessions with an amazing combination of factual knowledge and personal connection. But he didn't start out that way by any means. At the Democratic National Convention in 1988, the young governor of Arkansas gave a keynote address that was not only long on enthusiasm, it was just plain long. Clinton was so obviously enamored of his first moments in the national spotlight that he lost track of everything else. After he had been talking for about 40 minutes, he said something like, "Now in closing," and the audience actually began to cheer. There had been some speculation that Clinton might even enter the '88 presidential race himself, but his keynote address showed that he needed a bit more seasoning. His eagerness to make himself heard was a good quality. Sometimes, however, there can be too much of a good thing. While Bill Clinton was overly eager to show the world who he was, many more public speakers are determined to show who they aren't. Their speaking personality is negatively rather than positively defined. Their first priority is to not be long-winded, to not be obscure, to not be dull, and as a result, they literally get themselves all tied up in knots. One of the fundamental principles of effective public speaking is don't apologize. That means more than not saying you're sorry. It means that you shouldn't step up to the podium with the attitude that you don't really deserve to be there. It means you shouldn't try to win the audience over by referring to your own nervousness or your unworthiness to make the speech you're about to give. You may think that your conspicuous humility will win them over, but there's also a good chance they'll simply agree with your self-deprecation. In public speaking, as in any other area of life, discovering your true self may take a bit of time. You may alternate between an overly eager presentation and an excessively restrained one. But as you go through this process, keep one thing in mind. Great speakers are made, not born. Developing yourself as a public speaker is a creative art, just like painting or sculpture. The only difference is you are both the artist and the medium. But that's not all. Public speaking is also a science in which certain axioms have been proven true over time. Developing the art of public speaking may involve some trial and error, but you can become a scientific public speaker very quickly. For the balance of this session, we'll be looking at key principles that virtually all great speakers use and depend upon. More in a moment. One basic axiom of public speaking is very simple. Don't just make your speech interesting, make it the most interesting speech your audience has ever heard. It's not that difficult. All you have to do is talk about the subject that your audience finds more fascinating than any other. That's all there is to it. And what is that totally irresistible subject? Well, one of the speakers Dale Carnegie most admired was a man named Russell Conwell. His best-known speech, which he called Acres of Diamonds, was given nearly 6,000 times. You might think that a talk repeated that often would become set in the speaker's mind, that no word or intonation would vary in delivery. But that's not what happened. Russell Conwell knew that no two audiences are alike. He knew that he had to make each new group of listeners feel that he was addressing them and them alone, and that no one had heard his message before. How did Conwell manage to do this from one speaking engagement to the next? "When I visit a town or city," he wrote, "I try to arrive early enough to see the barber, the hotel manager, the principal of the schools, and some of the ministers. Then I go into the shops and just talk with people. I learn their history and what opportunities they had. When I give my lecture, I know exactly how to deliver each phrase. Even though the message may be the same as in all of my previous talks, the actual speech I deliver is now entirely unique." Successful communication depends upon how well a speaker can make his talk a part of the listeners, and also the listeners a part of the talk. That is why there is no definitive text of the Acres of Diamonds speech, despite the fact that it is one of the most popular talks ever given. Keep this example in mind as you prepare to give a talk. Make certain that you have the specifics of your audience clearly in mind. Make a point of bringing local people and local issues into your talk. Your audiences will be interested because the speech will seem to be about them, about their interests, their problems, their hopes and dreams. Never forget that your listeners are most interested in themselves. By creating a linkage between this interest and whatever your topic might be, you can guarantee the rapt attention of your audience. So this is axiom number 1. No matter what you're talking about, connect it directly to the self-interest of your listeners. A second axiom is also focused on appreciating your audience, but in a subtle and irresistible way. There's nothing dishonest about this because you should be totally sincere about it. Simply put, you should express genuine, sincere appreciation for the opportunity to address your listeners. Audiences are composed of individuals, and they react like individuals. If you openly criticize them, they will quite naturally resent it. But if you show appreciation for something they've done, you can win their hearts. And regardless of how much or how little you may know about a specific group of listeners, one thing you do know is that they asked you to speak. So communicate appreciation for that fact. Moreover, find a creative way to do it that expresses both your excitement and your sincerity. You see, no matter how naive or unintelligent the individual members of an audience might be, as a group, they're incredibly perceptive. An insincere statement may fool an individual, but if you're addressing a large group of people, you'll never get away with it. So don't try to fake it. Find a way to feel really grateful for this opportunity, and then clearly express that feeling. An excellent way to start showing appreciation is by immediately identifying yourself with the audience. Break down the distinction between you and them. As soon as possible, perhaps even with the first words out of your mouth, indicate some direct relationship with the group you're addressing. Whether you know it or not, that relationship does exist. Your job is to find it and use it. When Harold Macmillan, the Prime Minister of England, addressed the graduating class at DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana, the connection between the speaker and the audience may not have seemed obvious to his listeners, but Macmillan dealt with that in his very first sentence. He mentioned that his mother was an American, born in Indiana, and that her father had been one of DePauw's first graduates. It's a small world, right? By establishing the connection between the school and his own family, Macmillan immediately won friends. Our next axiom concerns the fact that speaking is not just an audio medium. Effective speakers know how to use visual stimuli to enhance what they have to say. So don't just reach your listeners through their ears. Eye contact is also a hugely important way of connecting. When you speak, it's really your eyes that involve your listeners in your presentation. And on the other side of the coin, there's no surer way to break the bond between you and the audience than by failing to look at your listeners. No matter how many people may be present, every one of them wants to feel that you're focused on him or her alone. Only by looking at your listeners as individuals can you convince them that you're sincerely interested in them and that you care whether they accept your message. And eye contact also has benefits for you as a speaker. Your eyes can function as a control device to assure your attention and concentration in your audience. By looking from one person to another, you can determine how well your message is being received. When you develop the ability to gauge the audience's reactions and adjust your presentation accordingly, you will be much more effective as a speaker. I want to emphasize the importance of eye contact because it's so often overlooked, and also because it's such a powerful tool once you learn how to use it. To see how this works, try this exercise. The next time you're watching a movie, notice how much of your attention is directed at the eyes of the actors on the screen, not at their hands, not at their costumes, but at their eyes. Once you become aware of this, you'll see how experienced actors use their eyes to communicate every kind of thought and emotion. This is a skill that takes a long time to learn, but it's really one of the defining qualities of good actors and of great speakers as well. No one is better at this than Johnny Depp, especially in the Pirates of the Caribbean films. As Captain Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp may be saying one thing, but his eyes show that his thoughts and feelings are completely the opposite. Johnny Depp learned this technique by studying the great actors of the silent film era, especially Charlie Chaplin. Obviously, silent film actors couldn't develop their characters through the spoken word, so they created a whole vocabulary of emotions that were communicated entirely with their eyes. As a speaker, don't overlook the opportunity to make or emphasize a point through the power of a glance. Remember, your listeners have their eyes on you. More specifically, they have their eyes on your eyes, so take advantage of that fact. As you'll recall from Session 1, memorizing a speech word for word is a bad idea, but bringing some notes to the podium can be useful, and not just because of what's written down. If you watch experienced speakers, you'll notice how they use their notes as a prop to establish a rhythm with the audience. And their eyes are the principal tool for doing this. When making an especially important point, a good speaker will be looking directly at the audience, and perhaps even at an individual member of the audience. Then, after the point has been made, the speaker may turn his eyes towards some notes for a moment or two, which gives the audience a moment to absorb what they've just heard. Then, when the speaker looks up again, it's like the beginning of a new talk, with a whole new infusion of energy. Your physical appearance is another very important non-audio aspect of good speaking. Make no mistake, when you're standing in front of people for a substantial period of time, they have a chance to check you out very closely. Every detail of what you wear should be the result of a conscious decision on your part, because at the end of your speech, there may be some people who don't know what you said, but virtually all of them will know what kind of shoes you were wearing, or whether your tie was crooked. So make sure that every item of your clothing is clean and well tailored. Don't wear jewelry that might glitter or jingle when you move or gesture. And most importantly, try to dress in a way that matches the style and level of your listener's attire. If you're addressing a NASCAR convention, you might try wearing a cowboy hat, but don't do it when you address the school board. As with eye contact, it's amazing how often this basic tactical principle is ignored. So as you're preparing your speech, spend a moment or two in front of a full-length mirror in the outfits you intend to wear. It's a chance to be proud of how great you look, and it might also be a chance to save yourself some embarrassment. A final visual aspect of effective speaking is the way you move in front of an audience, or whether you move at all. As always, this should be a matter of conscious choice, and it should start at the moment after you're introduced. You should walk briskly, purposefully, confidently, and calmly to your speaking position. Have a smile on your face, or at least a pleasant expression. Even if you're terrified of what you're about to do, try to relax. Initially, don't look at the audience. Look instead at the person who has just introduced you, and greet that person with a handshake and a word of thanks. Then pause, arrange your notes if you have any, and finally turn your gaze toward your listeners. Does all this sound very familiar? In a later session, we'll have much more to say about how to win over an audience in the first minute. But for now, we'll just suggest that you close your eyes and imagine every good speaker you've ever seen when he or she first mounts the stage. The sequence is so well established that you can probably see it with absolute clarity. Now all you have to do is imitate what you see in your mind's eye. You may not have done it 1,000,000 times, but you've probably seen it 1,000,000 times. So now, just do it on your own. As you get into your presentation, you may feel confident enough to move away from the lectern or podium. But if you do, you should know where you're going. You shouldn't just be wandering around, nor should you just exchange one fixed position for another. Very often, speakers move out from behind the podium, but then they stop right beside it and never move again. Like so many other aspects of public speaking, the correct way to move around has actually been well documented. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it, and the right way is actually very simple. Think of your initial position behind the lectern as your home base. Now identify 2 other positions as alternative bases. As your talk progresses, you're going to be moving among those 3 locations, and only those 3 locations. Further, your movement should be dictated by the content of your material, not just by your desire to take a stroll. Just as when you consult your notes, moving from one point to another can give your listeners a chance to absorb what you've just said, or it can provide an infusion of energy for a point you're about to make. As with every other aspect of your speech, the way you move in front of your audience is something you should practice beforehand. Remember, everything about great public speaking only looks natural. Nobody was born knowing how to talk, let alone talk in order to captivate others. With all the excitement you're creating in your talk, one thing you don't want to do is to lose track of time. Many talks can be informative and exciting, but it's very rare for people to wish they went on longer than they did. You don't have to tell people how long your presentation is going to be, but you can rest assured they're wondering about it. So err on the side of caution. When you feel you've got your talk well prepared, try cutting it a bit. No one will mind, and by lowering the word count, you may force yourself to say things more directly and powerfully. A similar issue comes into play when speakers create a checklist of topics. The list becomes a kind of clock in its own right. Telling your listeners how many points you're going to cover can give them a sense that you're well organized and prepared. But if the number is more than 3, you're better off keeping that information to yourself. If you've ever been at a presentation where the speaker promised to discuss 7 topics, you know why this is true. It's very difficult not to start counting on your fingers, trying to figure out how much is still to come. And from the speaker's point of view, it's hard to keep track of where you are on the shopping list unless you consult your notes, which doesn't really support the well-organized impression you were trying to make in the first place. In an upcoming session, you'll learn why 3 is the magic number when it comes to presentations. Anything beyond that isn't really public speaking, it's higher mathematics. We've covered a lot of ground in this session. Since we've discussed some of the absolute essentials of talking to an audience, you might want to listen to it again before going on to session 3. But don't delay too long, because session 3 will cover one of the most prevalent issues of public speaking. It's commonly called stage fright, but as you'll see, it's not really the stage that we need be frightened of. As someone once said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. In this session, we'll address one of the most widespread obstacles to effective public speaking. The problem is the fear of speaking in public that many people feel, which is often mentioned as people's biggest fear of all. Getting up in front of an audience is something that makes many people uncomfortable. But as you're about to learn, anxiety about public speaking can quickly be brought under control with just a little effort and information. That's why the title of Session 3 is, We Have Nothing to Fear But Fear Itself. If there's one topic in which that famous precept is right on the money, this has got to be it. When people say they're afraid of speaking in public, what is it that they're really afraid of? Unless you're addressing a hostile audience in some very dangerous region of the world, you probably don't have to worry about physical violence. And even if you were to suddenly draw a complete blank when you get behind the podium, it's unlikely that the audience will throw things or laugh out loud at you. On the contrary, everyone knows that making presentations is a challenge, so your listeners would probably be very sympathetic. So let's look very carefully at what people are really afraid of, and then we'll see how to deal with that fear. You see, it's not totally blowing it that we fear. It's being anything less than perfect. Nervous public speakers aren't afraid of striking out. They're afraid of not hitting a grand slam home run. They're afraid, for example, that they'll be recognized as being afraid, and that only makes the fear worse. For some reason, perfectionism seems to be built into the concept of public speaking. Yet perfectionism is just the opposite of what a good speaker should be feeling. This is true not only emotionally, but physically as well. You've probably heard of the so-called fight or flight response. It's the primal yes or no question that your brain asks when you're faced with a stress-inducing situation. It's the hardwired prehistoric choice that still exists in our minds even in the 21st century. Are we going to confront this threat like a good caveman or cavewoman, or are we going to run to the back of the cave and hide from it? Never mind that what we're confronting is not a dinosaur, but the weekly meeting of the PTA. At the deepest level, the human brain doesn't make those kind of distinctions. When you're feeling stressed by an unfamiliar circumstance, your brain thinks everything is on the line. The fight-or-flight response leads to some very well-documented physical reactions, and a couple of them are very unfortunate with respect to public speaking. It doesn't really matter that the pupils of your eyes dilate or that your digestive system begins to shut down, but the fight-or-flight response also causes a very powerful inhibition of the vocal cords. At the neurobiological level, the ability to talk is blocked. Your capability to speak is actually paralyzed. As if that weren't enough, your facial muscles can also freeze up, so you're not able to say anything, and you're not even able to grin and bear it. The fight-or-flight response has turned you into a stone statue. This is exactly what you were afraid of, right? And that's exactly why it happened, because you were afraid. The truth is, many highly accomplished public speakers continue to experience a certain level of stage fright, regardless of how many talks they've given, and they accept that as a fact of life. They don't have to completely erase the fear in order to bring it under control. They're pragmatists rather than perfectionists. Stage fright may come and go, but it usually does not vanish permanently. The secret to success is putting fright into the proper perspective and channeling it in a positive way. Dale Carnegie was not a psychologist or a neurologist, but he was definitely a pioneer in dealing effectively with public speaking anxiety. He liked to tell the story of an executive who joined his public speaking course in Philadelphia. This man had always led an active life. He owned a manufacturing company and was a leader in church work and civic activities. But before the first class session with Dale Carnegie, he made a confession. "I've been asked many times to speak before various gatherings," he said, "but I have never been able to accept any of those invitations. If I even think about standing up in front of a room, my mind just goes blank. And now I've been invited to join the board of trustees at my college alma mater. It's a great honor, but I'll have to preside at meetings, and I'll definitely have to do some talking. Do you think I can learn to handle something like that at this point in my life?" As he later described it, Dale Carnegie's reply was very straightforward. He said, "It's not a question of what I think. I know you can do this, and I know you will if you just pay attention and practice what you learn." The executive wanted to believe what he'd just heard, but it seemed too rosy, too optimistic. "You're just trying to be kind," he said. "You're trying to encourage me." At the end of the course, he and Dale Carnegie lost touch for several years. But when they finally met again, Carnegie asked if he had been too optimistic in their previous conversation. So the executive took a notebook from his pocket and revealed a list of upcoming talks and meetings. Not only had he given many public presentations of various kinds, but he was developing a whole new career as a speaker. And this was the man, Dale Carnegie wrote, who had solemnly asked me if I thought he would ever be able to talk in public. Most people make very rapid progress once they approach public speaking in an organized way, and this is especially true when it comes to overcoming fear. The Dale Carnegie organizations have worked with literally thousands of people in this area, and we're continually updating our techniques. We've mentioned just one client, but there are many more. To cite another instance, there was a New York City physician, we can call him Dr. Curtis, who liked to take vacations in Florida near the spring training camp of the Los Angeles Dodgers. He often went to see them practice, and over time he became friendly with the players and the team manager. And one year he was invited to attend a banquet given at the end of spring training. Toward the end of the dinner, as coffee was served, several guests were invited to say a few words. As much as he had enjoyed himself that evening, this made Dr. Curtis extremely uneasy, and suddenly, like an explosion, his worst fear came true. He heard the team manager say, "We happen to have a man with us tonight who is both a real baseball fan and a very talented physician. I'd appreciate it if Dr. Curtis would speak for a moment on the health concerns of Major League ball players." The doctor could hardly believe this was happening. He had no idea that he would be asked to speak. Was he prepared? Well, in one sense, he had the best preparation in the world. He had been practicing medicine for 30 years. He could have talked all night to the man seated on his right about any aspect of physical health. But to get up and say the same things to even a small audience, that was another matter. For that, he was totally unprepared. His heart raced, his palms sweated, his throat was dry. He had never made a public speech in his life, and whatever he knew about this subject flew out the window. What was he going to do? The audience was applauding. Everyone was looking at him. He hesitated, but that served only to heighten the applause and increase the demand. There were cries of, "Dr. Curtis, speech, speech." The physician was in positive misery. He knew that if he stood up, he would be unable to utter half a dozen sentences. So he arose, and without saying a word, turned his back on his friends and walked silently out of the room. It couldn't possibly have been worse. Dr. Curtis didn't want to face that situation ever again. As soon as he got back to New York, he enrolled in Dale Carnegie's public speaking course, and he never missed a single session. As a result, he progressed at a rate that surpassed anything he could have expected. After the first few sessions, his nervousness subsided, and over the coming weeks, his confidence soared. In 2 months, he had become the star speaker of the class. Not only that, but he was soon accepting invitations to speak elsewhere. In less than a year, it seemed impossible that he would have ever walked out of a banquet because he was afraid to get up and talk. Self-confidence and courage while talking to a group is nowhere near as hard as people imagine. It's not a gift bestowed on only a few lucky individuals. You learn to talk, which is probably the greatest intellectual accomplishment of anyone's life. Having done this, you can also learn to talk in public. No matter how frightening that prospect now seems, anyone can develop that ability if there's real desire to do so. Stage fright isn't really an accurate term for the anxiety that often accompanies a speaking engagement. Actually, most of the fear occurs before you step on the stage. Once people are up there, it usually goes away for most of them. There are even some positive side effects of being nervous. It makes your reflexes sharper and heightens your energy. When you are nervous about speaking, you may be conscious of your posture and breathing. Many people actually look healthier and more attractive on the outside precisely because of their inner distress. Even for very experienced speakers, there is a certain sense of responsibility in making a talk. Depending on the individual, this sense of responsibility can range from barely suppressed panic to outward exhilaration. 2,000 years ago, the Roman orator Cicero said that all public speaking of real merit was characterized by nervousness. So a good speaker is always keyed up before an event, like a thoroughbred straining at the bit. Even Abraham Lincoln felt shy for the few opening moments of a talk. As his law partner William Herndon described it, Lincoln was always very awkward at first, and it seemed a real labor to adjust himself to his surroundings. I have often seen and sympathized with Mr. Lincoln during those moments. When he began speaking, his voice was shrill, piping, and unpleasant. His manner, his attitude, his oddity of pose, everything seemed to be against him. But this only lasted for a short time. In a few moments, he always gained composure and warmth and earnestness, and then his real speech began. Your experience may be very similar to Lincoln's, in which case you'll be in good company. But in order to master the art of public speaking as quickly as possible, 4 things are absolutely essential. First, start with a strong and persistent desire to speak and connect with the audience. This is more important than you may realize. If an experienced public speaker could look into your heart right now, he or she could foretell almost with certainty the success you will have, based simply on how much you want it. If you go after this subject with persistence and energy, nothing can deter you. So arouse your enthusiasm for this opportunity. Focus on the benefits. Think of what the ability to talk more convincingly will mean to you, both personally and in dollars and cents. Think of what it can mean to you socially, of the friends it will bring you, of the influence it will confer on you, or the leadership it will impart to you. In fact, being able to express yourself well in public will make you a leader more quickly than any other activity you could imagine. This is true now, and it has always been true. 100 years ago, Andrew Carnegie was the wealthiest and most influential businessman in America. After his death in 1919, there was found among his papers a plan for his life, drawn up when he was 33 years old. He felt that in 2 more years he would be able to retire. At that point, he hoped to attend Oxford University for a classical education, including, as he put it, special attention to speaking in public. Although Carnegie did not retire as he planned, he remained totally in awe of the ability to speak well. He was much more impressed by this talent than by the ability to make money, which may have been because he himself was one of the richest men in the world. In every field, a certain percentage of people give up before they fulfill their potential and reach their goals. Their desire to succeed is simply not equal to the effort that success demands. As you go through this program, and especially this section on overcoming fear, you should keep thinking of what it will mean to you until your desire is white hot. Start this learning experience with an enthusiasm that will carry you through to the end. Do everything to reinforce that enthusiasm. Tell your friends that you have decided to improve your speaking skills. Set aside a specific time each day for listening to the program and practicing what you learn. In short, make it as easy as possible to move forward. Make it as difficult as possible to retreat. As Dale Carnegie said, few things compare to standing before an audience and transferring what is in your mind to theirs. There is a kind of magic in it. 2 minutes before I began, one speaker confessed, "I would rather be shot than go ahead. But 2 minutes before I finish, I would rather be shot than stop." If overwhelming desire is the first step to conquering fear, thorough knowledge is the second. Before you talk, you must know thoroughly what you're going to talk about. Unless you know exactly what you're going to say, you can't feel very comfortable when you face your audience. You're like the blind leading the blind. Under such circumstances, you ought to be self-conscious. You ought to feel repentant, and you ought to be ashamed of your negligence. Have a message, and then think of yourself as a messenger instructed to deliver it. People pay little attention to a messenger. It is the message that they want. So keep your mind on it. Keep your heart in it. Know it like the back of your hand. Believe it, and speak as if you were determined to say it. Do that, and you will soon be master of the audience and master of yourself. When I was elected to the New York State Legislature, Theodore Roosevelt wrote in his autobiography, I found myself the youngest man there. I had difficulty in teaching myself to speak. I profited from some good advice which ran, don't speak until you are sure you have something to say and you know just what it is. Then say it, and then sit down. Here's some more advice that might have benefited Roosevelt and that will certainly benefit you. It will help diffuse your anxiety if you can find some prop to use in front of your audience. Show them something. Write a word on a blackboard, point out a spot on a map, move a table, open a window. Any physical action with a purpose behind it will help you to feel more at home. So desire comes first, then knowledge, and confidence is next. William James, the great American psychologist, wrote as follows, action seems to follow feeling, but really action and feeling go together. By regulating our actions which are under our direct control, we can regulate our feelings which are not. To feel brave, apply William James' advice and act as if you were brave. To develop some courage when you are facing an audience, act as if you already had it. Of course, unless you are prepared, all the acting in the world won't help. But once you know what you're going to talk about, step out briskly and take a deep breath. In fact, breathe deeply for 30 seconds or so before you ever face your audience. Then draw yourself up to your full height and look your listeners straight in the eyes, and begin to talk as confidently as if every one of them owed you money. In fact, imagine that they do owe you money. Pretend that they are there to beg you for an extension of credit. The next point we need to make here is definitely the most important. Even if you forget everything you have heard so far, remember this. The first way, the last way, the never-failing way to develop self-confidence in speaking is to speak. Really, the whole matter finally comes down to but one essential: practice, practice, practice. What public speaking requires is not really courage, but cool-headedness. This can only come through experience. It takes continual effort and repeated exercise of willpower. So keep at it. Fear comes from lack of confidence, and lack of confidence comes from lack of practice. Once you have sufficient for the balance of this session, we'll look at how and why this happens, and we'll see how you can manage anxiety even if you can't entirely eliminate it. A recurrence of stage fright can begin very innocently. From your vantage point behind the podium, you may notice someone in the front row with a bored expression. You wonder to yourself whether your energy level is where it needs to be. Then you see someone whispering something to her neighbor, and you worry that your hair is out of place or your tie is crooked. Or worse yet, maybe you're thinking how completely wrong-headed your ideas are. Pretty soon your palms are sweating, although you thought you'd conquered this long ago. And you're thinking that maybe you're not cut out for this after all. Sooner or later in your speaking career, something like this will probably happen to you. It happens to almost every speaker, from the beginner to the most seasoned professional. It's truly how we can generate negative thoughts during a presentation, almost as if we wanted to defeat ourselves. It all begins with a loss of focus. Some minor distraction occurs, and we become less and less able to concentrate. The result can be nervousness, memory lapse, sudden fear, and general discomfort. Yet the whole problem can often be avoided by keeping a few basic ideas in mind before you stand up to speak. No matter how new or how experienced you may be, run through this mental checklist a few minutes before going on stage, because a few moments of prevention are worth many hours of cure. Start by reminding yourself that you have prepared to the best of your ability. As we discussed in Session 1, you have done your research and you have done your rehearsals. You may wonder whether you could have done more, but that kind of second-guessing is not appropriate at this moment. Instead, you're going to go on automatic pilot. You're going to let your diligent preparation do its work. Tell yourself that the hard part is over. Now you can just trust your preparation to do the work for you. No more effort or worry is required. Everything you need is already here for you. Next, make yourself a promise to relinquish judgment of your talk during the time it's going on. Self-judgment during a performance is also self-destruction. It takes you out of the present and into the past or future, and it destroys the natural flow of your speech. So rather than judge your talk, simply observe it without any inner commentary, but with full inner motivation. When you are about to make a major point, for example, intend to do it, and then feel it as you are doing it. At that moment, you are translating intention into action. Third, remind yourself not to let the reaction of anyone in the audience influence your performance. Don't let anything you see or hear cause you to second-guess yourself. If you have done a sufficient amount of rehearsing, you may feel that you know how listeners will react to your message. But rehearsal is not a perfect system. The responses of your friends and family can only partly predict what a totally new audience will do. If you start wondering about the guy in the front row, you'll be wondering about the other guy in the fourth row, and the upshot will be a major erosion of confidence. Trying to imagine what someone in the audience is thinking is useless and distracting. It's also a big waste of energy. For the period of time you are speaking, you need only to please yourself. In other words, keep your mind on stage, not in the audience. Be in the giving mode, not the receiving one. Be in the moment, and be in the speech. You can't be the speaker and the listener at the same time, so leave the response to the audience. Your task is to communicate what you have thought and felt and practiced. That's all, and that's enough. Now, just as your talk is about to begin, think about one aspect of your performance that is your top priority. What is the single thing that you most need to remember? Don't think about this while you're talking. Think about it beforehand. You may, for instance, want to emphasize good posture, so you remind yourself to stand up straight. Or you can recall the importance of speaking clearly and varying the cadence of your sentences. Although there may be dozens of elements you would like to emphasize, choosing more than one will only diminish the benefits of this exercise. So choose one aspect and choose it carefully. Finally, and most importantly, make yourself ready to enjoy the presentation you're about to give. This is the time when you can finally share with your listeners what you have worked so hard to achieve. This is a time of joy, not a time for correcting real or imagined errors. There will be time for that later. Right now, let the thoughts and emotions of your speech take over. Don't allow minor details to obscure your feelings. Let your excitement for the opportunity be present. Let your passion as a speaker show through, because the only thing you have to fear really is fear itself. This concludes Session 3. Please join me for Session 4, in which you'll learn not only how to make people listen to you, but how to make them love you as well. Welcome to Session 4 of Stand and Deliver. In this session, our topic will be the use of humor in public speaking. And make no mistake, humor is a very powerful tool. But it's not just a laughing matter. It must be used carefully, and there are even times when it shouldn't be used at all. Generally speaking, if you can convey your message in an amusing and entertaining manner, that's great. But if humor is used awkwardly or distastefully, you can seriously damage your cause. The problem is, it's not always easy to know when humor is appropriate and when it isn't, because this seems to be one subject on which everyone considers himself an expert. Or to put it another way, it's very rare to hear someone say, "I just don't have a good sense of humor." And in fact, it's very difficult to prove that person wrong because humor is a totally subjective quality. If you say that you can beat the Wimbledon champion in a tennis match, there is an objective way of proving whether that's true or not. The proof will appear on the scoreboard. But if you say that there's nothing funny about Seinfeld, it's completely a matter of opinion. Even if everyone else in the room is laughing at the show, you can shrug your shoulders and say they're wrong. They just don't have good taste, and you do. In public speaking, however, it doesn't really matter whether you think something is funny. What matters is what the audience thinks. So while in theory every speech can benefit from a humorous element, in practice this depends on several variables. And what's the most important variable? Let's answer that question with more questions. Are you funny or aren't you? Can you use humor effectively or can't you? Once again, however, it's not easy to find simple answers to these questions. You've probably met people who could not tell a joke if their lives depended on it. Yet those people might actually be very funny individuals, precisely because they're so inept at being funny. If any general statement can be made about humor in public speaking, it might be this: everyone can use humor effectively once they find the type of humor that fits their personality and speaking style. It all comes back to that fundamental axiom we mentioned at the start of the program: know thyself. So as you listen to the ideas and concepts of this session, ask yourself whether you would really feel comfortable building them into your live presentations. Humor is too serious to be taken lightly, but it's also an extremely potent attribute to have in your public speaking arsenal. So let's get started. Did you hear the one about the duck who complained to the electric company? He was angry about his bill. Just kidding. But did you laugh? If not, it may be because my joke wasn't funny. But it might also be because you weren't expecting to hear a joke in an audio program on public speaking. This leads to an important insight about the nature of humor. When you go to the movies to see a comedy film, you may have noticed a very interesting phenomenon. The audience usually starts laughing before anything funny has happened. The beginning of the movie can be totally without humorous content, but people still laugh. Why? Well, they bought tickets to a comedy, and the purpose of comedy is to evoke laughter. So, they laugh, whether or not anything funny is actually happening. By understanding what this means, you can gain some very useful insights about humor. You'll see why bringing humor into a speech is more than just a way to add entertainment value. Instead, it's fulfilling a very basic need on the part of the audience. People don't just want to laugh, they need to laugh. If you can help them do that, it's just as if you've given food to a hungry person. You've not only made their lives easier, you've actually helped them survive. And needless to say, they'll be very receptive to your message as a result. It's often been pointed out that human beings are the only animals that laugh. But what do we actually laugh at? Is it possible to make a general statement about what people think is funny? Or let's start small. Can you even say what you yourself think is funny in any kind of a general way? So the next time you hear people in an audience laugh, ask yourself, what's so funny? As we've mentioned, quite often the answer is nothing. The laughter isn't because anything hilarious is happening on the screen at a theater. It's happening because the audience needs to laugh. In a similar way, if you see 100 people eating dinner in a restaurant, it may be because the food is great, but even if it isn't so great, they will still continue eating because they need to eat. At dinner time or lunchtime, most people are hardwired to eat, so they do. What's more, you can get them to eat in your restaurant even if you're not the greatest chef in the world. You just have to connect with their built-in need to eat and fulfill that need to a serviceable level. That's why talent for being funny is not essential for using humor effectively in a presentation. What is essential is the desire to be funny and the ability to communicate that desire to your listeners. If you can show your audience that you at least want them to laugh, they're certain to go along with you because remember, laughter is something they need. The only way you can really fail with humor is when people aren't sure what you want them to do. If they know they bought a ticket to a comedy, they'll act the way they're supposed to act at a comedy. But if they're not sure what kind of show they're seeing, they won't be in their funny gear. And if they're not in their funny gear, they're not going to laugh because they're not sure that's what they're supposed to do. When an audience is in funny gear, they'll take your humor and words in a playful way and enjoy them as well. But if they're in serious gear, nothing will make them laugh. Either they won't understand what they're supposed to do, or they'll resent the fact that they're now being asked to laugh by somebody that they don't think is funny. To help with this, experienced speakers sometimes use a very simple test. Before they go out to face the audience, they ask the host of the event to put a little joke into the introduction. From the audience response, the speaker can tell how receptive they'll be to a humorous approach. If the audience isn't ready and expecting to laugh, trying to use humor could backfire. You must be able to read your audience accurately. It's better to not go for a laugh than try for one and come up empty. Once listeners are primed for humor, there's a basic shift in the way they see the world. Pleasant things are still seen in a positive light, but even some usually disagreeable things provoke a laugh. This leads to a key point about humor. Painful things told playfully is a huge resource of laughs, but it's got to be done carefully. For example, it's okay to make fun of other people, but this can never seem mean-spirited, and there's actually a very simple way to handle this. Here's the rule. Don't try to laugh about traits that people can't control or change. You can make a joke about someone who doesn't know how to park a car, but not about someone who got hit by a car. The single exception to this is if the person hit by the car was you. You yourself are always fair game for your own humor. So in breaking the ice and becoming a welcome speaker, there is no better way than to make yourself the butt of the joke. Self-deprecating humor is always safe in that you appear human to your audience, and you do not risk offending them in any way. In fact, the more you make fun of yourself, the more you're allowed to make fun of other things, including other people. So an excellent rule of thumb to follow is get at least one laugh at your own expense before you try to laugh at anything else. Then continue to weave self-deprecating humor into any other humorous material in your speech. These are general rules, but the specific type of humor you should use depends on your own speaking style. Are you more comfortable with quiet, subtle wit, or are you more likely to go after big laughs? Or if you're like many people, maybe you're not sure right now what kind of humor best fits your personal style. So right now, let's take a quick look at some different types of humor, and as you'll see, there are a lot of them. Some of them may seem very funny to you, while others may strike you as exactly the opposite. As you listen to this survey, see which categories of humor seem like the best fit with your personality. Also, feel free to laugh, because your own laughter is probably the best guide to the right kind of humor for you. One of the most powerful tools of humorous public speaking is the anecdote. To define exactly what an anecdote is, we can contrast it with its close relative, the joke. A joke is a brief narrative with a humorous climactic twist. An anecdote is also a narrative, but it is usually not as brief as a joke. Also, the humorous content of an anecdote is not generally saved until the end. An anecdote can be funny all the way through, or it can also be not funny if the speaker chooses. But the power of a joke depends on our not acknowledging any humorous content until the punchline comes. For many people, the very idea of a duck telephoning the electric company might seem funny, but we put that humor aside in order to finally let it go in the closing line. The greater flexibility of the anecdote as opposed to the joke is what makes the anecdote such a valuable device. At the end of his life, financial pressures forced Mark Twain to embark on extended lecture tours all over the world. In these lectures, he told the same anecdotes over and over again, and amazingly, the result was always the same. His audiences went crazy with laughter. People who heard Twain's lectures reported that some of his listeners actually seemed to be in pain because they were laughing so hard. To some extent, of course, Twain's anecdotes had this effect simply because the content of the stories was funny. But more importantly, He was able to shorten or lengthen or otherwise adjust the anecdotes based on his understanding of the audience. This isn't really possible with a joke in which the time between beginning, middle, and end are predetermined. With this in mind, effective public speakers always have a stockpile of humorous anecdotes, informative stories, and inspirational narratives. Moreover, they also know how to employ these anecdotes for maximum effectiveness. They know how to read the collective mind of their audience based on the reaction that an anecdote provokes, and they also know how to adjust the anecdote itself based on that reaction. Within the general category of anecdote, there are several subclassifications that a speaker can choose from. For example, if you are most comfortable with an informal style, you might want to make use of what's called an aside. This is a seemingly casual departure from the path of your speech, a departure that gains power from seeming spontaneous and unplanned. Abraham Lincoln, according to many reports, was a master of the aside. Again and again, Lincoln would pause in his presentation of some crucial point and veer off in a new direction, usually remarking, "That reminds me of a story." The aside is a great attention-getter. It works best when you feel that the concentration of the audience may seem to be waning. If your listeners have been working hard to follow your train of thought, they'll respond to a humorous aside just as a marathon runner responds to a drink of water. You can reinvigorate them before returning to your main points. What's more, if it's done correctly, the aside itself will dovetail nicely back into the body of your speech. You can even pretend to be surprised by this, especially if you've secretly spent hours practicing it in your hotel room. One of the most useful categories of anecdotes is something we can call the blunder story. This is just what it sounds like. You tell a story about some humorous mistake you made. By doing so, you gain not only the affection and the sympathy of your audience, but their admiration as well. They like you because you're a fallible human being. They'll feel sorry for you because you made a human mistake. And they admire you because you're able to admit it. But let's look a little more closely at the blunder story because there are a few small adjustments that can make it especially effective. There was a time when people might have laughed hardest at huge blunders. In times gone by, for example, a certain amount of pain and even cruelty was thought to be essential for humor. A blunder that caused a house to burn down or a ship to sink would have people rolling in the aisles. But a modern blunder story works very differently. As any viewer of Seinfeld will tell you, the key today is basing your blunder on the smallest possible premise. For some reason, we think it's much funnier to lose the cap to a tube of toothpaste than to slip on a banana peel in front of the Queen of England. It's also much easier to find small premise stories in our own lives. So give some thought to little things in your life that have gone awry and see how they can be turned into humorous anecdotes in the Seinfeld manner. As Jerry Seinfeld himself said, it was supposed to be a show in which nothing happened. But really it was a show in which what happened was as close to nothing as possible, and that's what made it funny. By keeping that concept in mind, you'll find plenty of humorous material in the things that happen to you every day. I hope all this sounds good to you. I hope it even sounds funny. But now let's face a really ugly possibility. Suppose you're up in front of an audience and you've told anecdotes and you've veered off into asides and you've talked about losing the cap to the toothpaste and none of it has worked. It's just not funny. You know it and they know it. If that happens, congratulations, because you've opened up one of the most fertile fields of contemporary humor. Consider this. The talk show is one of the most original creations of American popular culture. It was born with the introduction of television, and it's still developing and changing today. But through all of its existence, one specific joke has been worked and reworked by every talk show host, up to and including Jay Leno and David Letterman. Quite simply, the joke is that the jokes aren't funny. From Steve Allen in the 1950s to Conan O'Brien in the 21st century, comedians have built careers on reacting to the audience's failure to laugh. By grimacing every time a line bombs, a comic is really making the same joke over and over again. A joke we can call recovery. And if you do it right, it's a very funny joke. So learn how to exploit your own vulnerability as a humorous speaker instead of hiding from it. Learn how to make the unfunniness of your material funny in itself. This is really a basic aspect of contemporary humor, and every speaker should attempt to master it. By now, you should be getting the idea that there are lots of implements in the toolbox of humor. Maybe you've never really thought about them in an analytical way before. You just laugh when you thought something was funny. But by seeing that categories of humor really do exist, and by understanding which ones are closest to your personal style, you can maximize your ability to make people laugh. However, this is another case of good news, bad news, and you know how funny those are. The good news is you can definitely learn to recognize categories of humorous material and build an arsenal of funny stuff. The bad news is you can have the funniest material in the world, but you still have to deliver it effectively. In a moment, we'll see exactly what that involves. Good delivery is your ability to present humorous material in the best way possible. How many times have you heard a person tell a long, complicated anecdote only to swallow the ending and ruin the story? And the same thing can happen with a very short joke, or even a one-liner. Jokes and anecdotes are only the raw material. They have to be crafted to fit smoothly into your talk. Most importantly, they have to be congruent with the overall meaning of your presentation. Your humor can't be an end in itself. It has to reinforce the true reason you're up in front of the room, and your delivery has to show your understanding of that fact. Effective speakers do not just play it for laughs. They use humor to illustrate their message. Chances are you've been invited to educate and inform your audience. If you also wish to entertain them, it's because entertaining them will make you more successful in your primary task. A judicious use of humor in your talk will keep the audience on your side. But how much humor can an audience absorb in one talk? How many jokes or anecdotes can people listen to before the humor becomes counterproductive? There's actually no single answer to that question because it all depends on your delivery. To deliver humor well, your material needs to be practiced and perfected. Once you have found content that seems promising, the next step is to work on it in your mind. That doesn't mean you have to analyze it in an intellectual way. In fact, doing so probably is the quickest way to destroy any comic energy. Instead, learn to hear it inside your head. Then, just as with other aspects of your public speaking material, practice delivering it out loud, both to yourself and to your friends. You'll learn something with every recitation. Mark Twain said, "A humorous story can sometimes be a work of high and delicate art, provided that an artist is telling it. But no art is absolutely necessary in telling a comical story. In fact, anybody can do it." This is certainly true, but even telling a simple joke does take some skill. Pace, intonation, and pauses are all critical elements that can make humor fly or flop, and mastering them in a specific story is always a process of trial and error. So don't try your humor on a full audience until you're sure you can do it well based on numerous rehearsals. Then, once you've used it in a given presentation and it's worked well to some extent, use it again as often as possible. Vary your delivery and the emphasis you give to one element or another. In particular, become conscious of the critical relationship between timing and comical effect. Timing is essentially the distance between the various parts of a story or a joke. It's the space between the setup and the payoff of humorous material. To help with this, watch professionals to see how they create just the right rhythm between the beginning, the middle, and the end of a story. Moreover, notice how the nature of a given audience can influence effective timing. Young, energetic listeners will want a faster pace than a more relaxed and older crowd. So if you're speaking to college students, your timing ought to be different than what you would use in a presentation to a group of retirees. Basically, the more you know about your audience, the more fine-tuned your humor can be. So find out all you can about their demographics, their interests, their political leanings, their favorite sports teams, everything you possibly can. Every organization or group has its own history that can be studied. Procedures, rituals, and select individuals can be fertile ground for humor. Talk to the event planners and longtime members of the organization. Then consider the specific nature of the event itself. An awards ceremony, for example, with the serious purpose of recognizing those who have accomplished great things, might not be well served by a humorous presentation. A technical paper presentation might not seem a place for laughs, but perhaps some laughs will be needed precisely because of the dry subject matter. With practice and experience, you'll learn to make correct judgments in these areas, and your stature as a public speaker will grow as a result. There are people who say, I could never use humor in my speech. I just don't feel comfortable with it. But the truth is, anyone can use humor, and every speaker should learn to employ this very powerful tool. So in closing, let's review some of the key principles you want to keep in mind. First, make sure the humor seems appropriate to the situation and funny to you. If you don't think something is funny, you certainly can't expect an audience to think so. That may seem so obvious that it doesn't even deserve mentioning, but it's amazing how many speakers ignore this basic premise. They fall back on worn-out, conventional material that would never make them laugh, but it seems safe, so they use it. That's a big mistake. Just as a salesperson should never sell a product that he or she wouldn't use, you should never tell a joke that wouldn't make you laugh. Secondly, before using humor in a speech, try it out with a friend or with a small group of people. And even if your experimental group doesn't respond initially, don't give up too quickly. The problem might be in your delivery. Feeling at home with a funny story can take time. You should use humor in a speech only after you're comfortable telling it and have tested it repeatedly. By the same token, don't be quick to give up on a story that you think is really funny. Wait until you're sure that the problem is the material itself and not the way you're delivering it. Third, make sure the humor relates to the basic content of your presentation. Humor should not be an end in itself. Remember, making your audience laugh is a good thing, but it's not the primary reason you're there. If you don't tie your humor to your key theme, the audience may like the jokes, but they'll wonder what point you are attempting to make. Finally, be careful that your humor doesn't come to dominate your identity behind the podium. You want to be known as a high-impact public speaker, not as a comedian. Humor should be only one of many elements you weave into your presentations. If your speaking personality becomes dominated by the humorous element, an audience may have trouble relating to you when you tackle a serious subject. Many efforts have been made to identify exactly what makes people laugh. If anyone comes up with a definitive answer, that person will make a fortune. But you don't need to be a philosopher of humor in order to use it in your presentations. And when you use it effectively, there is no more powerful tool for getting listeners on your side. The challenge is to use humor so that if your audience remembers your jokes, they will also remember your message. Which reminds me of a story. In fact, our next session will be about how to use stories to enhance your ability as a public speaker. So please join me for Session 5. Welcome to Session 5, and let's start this session out with a bang. The information you're going to hear in the next few minutes can almost instantly transform you from a complete novice to a thoroughly professional speaker. So listen carefully, practice diligently, and then start putting what you learn into action. Just by using the tools and techniques you'll gain here in Session 5, you'll immediately be a more effective speaker than 99% of the people who are out there now. To get started, let's imagine a retirement dinner in which two different guests are toasting the guest of honor. The first toast is given by the chief financial officer of the company. He says, "I always admired the acumen with which he managed his 401k. He optimized his tax advantages to the greatest possible degree, and his account steadily increased in value every fiscal year." There is polite applause, and the financial officer sits down. Then another colleague of the retiree begins a toast. It soon becomes clear this is someone who has known the guest of honor for many years. In his toast, he describes the game in which his best buddy scored the only 2 points of his rather undistinguished basketball career. He says, with seconds left in the game, he had the ball and an open path to the basket, but just then something really strange happened. He started to fall down, which was odd because there was nobody anywhere near him. It was as if he tripped over his own shoelace or something. In any case, he had to get rid of the ball before he hit the hardwood floor, so he just chucked it, and that was how he got his nickname, which, as you all know, is Swish. Both these men discussed the same topic, their friend, but they approached the topic in completely different ways. The first toast deals with a topic that's very difficult to visualize or dramatize. The second actually paints a picture of a specific incident, endows it with humor and drama, and then connects it to the present as the origin of the subject's nickname. We learn something about the man who's retiring, but we also hear a story that's vivid in its own right. In other words, more than one thing is going on. In this session, we'll define the different elements of an effective speech, whether it's a toast at a small retirement dinner or an address to a large meeting of corporate shareholders. The fact is, in any high-impact oral presentation, there are certain elements that absolutely need to be present. The only exceptions would be simple PowerPoint talks or small meetings in an office or a conference room. At all other times, whenever you're called upon to get up in front of an audience and speak for 20 or 30 minutes, these are the elements that you need to have in place. First, you need to clearly communicate the information or message of your talk. You need to get your facts and figures across. You need to have a theme or a thesis, and it has to be presented clearly and convincingly. Basically, doing this is why you are standing up there in the first place. Yet in terms of the impact you will make, this is actually the least important part of your speech. Or to put it another way, nobody will remember this aspect of your talk unless the other elements are at a home run level. Your information is very important, but information without impact disappears very quickly from people's minds. So let's move ahead to the next of the key elements. Element number 2 is stories or anecdotes about people other than yourself. In the previous session, we discussed the fact that an audience needs to laugh, not just wants to laugh, but needs to laugh, and by the same token, they also need to hear stories. So if all you're doing is giving them information, you're not fulfilling one of your listeners' basic needs, and you're not doing your job as a speaker. What kinds of stories should you tell? The answer to that depends on your levels of confidence and ability. A truly professional speaker makes every presentation a complete emotional and intellectual experience. That means the audience both thinks and feels, and with regard to feeling, the audience both laughs and cries. Think about some of the best speakers you've ever heard. How did you feel at the end of their talks? I suspect you felt as if you'd traversed a full range of your emotions, all the way from laughter to tears. This is what a really good presenter is able to do. An effective use of stories is a key tool for creating a full range of experiences for your listeners. We spoke in the last session of Abraham Lincoln's ability to ease his audience into a humorous story. I suspect that Lincoln was able to do the same thing with narratives of many different kinds. I also suspect that part of Lincoln's effectiveness derived from the fact that his speeches were not primarily storytelling sessions. His listeners had come in order to hear a political oration or a debate. They were able to buy into Lincoln's stories partly because those stories were presented in another context. They were a departure and possibly even a relief. As a public speaker, you have a chance to present a wide variety of materials in virtually any presentation, and you should take full advantage of that fact. When you make a point about your central thesis, always see if you can link it to a story. To put it another way, whenever you make people think, immediately follow up by making them feel. As your confidence grows, you'll be able to take listeners into a wider and wider range of feelings. This is something people really want from you as a speaker, even if they're not consciously aware of it. It's interesting to note that certain kinds of stories seem to succeed over and over again. They work because people can identify with the situations and with the thoughts and emotions that go with them. Stories about airplanes and airports are always good. Most people like to travel and find it stimulating, but the hassles that come with air travel today are a good counterpoint to the excitement. For similar reasons, stories about families and children are also very effective. Almost every parent has been on a long car trip with the kids in the back seat, so this is a ready-made setting for a story. If you want to tell a story about climbing Mount Everest, you'll have to spend some time painting the picture. But if you want to instantly connect with your audience, all you have to do is imitate your child saying, "Are we there yet?" But regardless of the subject or the setting, good speakers never tell a story just for its own sake. It has to be relevant to the topic of the speech. It has to illustrate a point. As Dale Carnegie put it, stories are the frosting on the cake, not the cake itself. Or to extend the metaphor, stories are one of the two layers of the cake that we've discussed so far. The first layer, you'll recall, is the information content of your presentation, and the second is the narratives you use to illustrate your thesis. You'll also recall that I said these stories should be about someone other than yourself. That's because the next element we're going to look at is self-revelation and how you can use it to make your speech a completely satisfying experience for your listeners. We'll get started on that in a moment. Although most stories are perceived as entertainment, they can also serve as a trigger for your audience to think and reflect. In fact, this is exactly what they should do. The success of your speech lies in the inner changes you bring about in your audience. We've seen how telling stories about other people can be a valuable tool in this respect, but telling about yourself, revealing yourself, and the real challenges you've faced might be even more essential. This has to be done very carefully, however. Remember, the key insight of the Dale Carnegie organization is that people's favorite topic is themselves. Since you're a person, the chances are you share this preoccupation with your own experiences. That can provide great energy for narratives of your personal experience, but somehow you will always have to relate it back to them. In the world as it is today, the bar has been set very high in terms of how much people are willing to share about themselves. We live in a society that is used to Oprah and Dr. Phil, not to mention Judge Judy. You are not going to connect with your audience on an emotional level by confessing that you lost the cap to the toothpaste. We've seen how that exact confession can work very well as a humorous anecdote, but what we're looking at here is a different layer of the cake. This is where you earn their affection and their respect by the degree of risk you're willing to take. You earn their trust by trusting them with a part of yourself. How far you should go with this depends on your own comfort level as well as the setting in which your speech takes place. If you're leading a workshop on personal financial planning, you might want to reveal that you once maxed out your credit card, but you probably wouldn't talk about a health problem or a tragic situation in your family. Yet those concerns might be perfectly appropriate for an audience that expects an emotional connection. In the financial planning workshop, for example, you might say something like, I began to wonder if I should look at a lower interest credit card. But at a weekend retreat on personal transformation, nobody wants to hear about Visa or American Express. So now you'll say, I began to wonder if I was wasting my life on unimportant things. In fact, you might even go further. You might say, I had to take responsibility for the failure of my marriage. A statement like that, with the self-revelation that it includes, may run the risk of offending some audiences. Such a statement might be too confrontational on an emotional level. By looking closely at yourself, you are urging them to do the same. But what if they can't do that? They might just tune you out. That's why it's crucial always to spin every self-revelation story in a positive direction at the end. You can go as far as you dare into your own life's challenges, provided you connect with the positive changes that happened as a result. Self-revelation is the most effective way to get into the hearts of your listeners, which is different from getting into their minds. By sharing your personal experiences, you're letting them know that you are one of them. If you analyze any really powerful speech, you'll always find a very personal story embedded within it. Consider the Earl of Spencer's very heartfelt eulogy for his sister, Princess Diana. With the entire world watching Diana's funeral, he said, The last time I saw her was in London on July 1st, her birthday. Typically, she was not taking time to celebrate her special day with friends, but was instead at a fundraising charity event. She was the sparkling guest of honor, of course, but I would rather cherish the days I spent with her in March, when she came to visit me and my children in our home in South Africa. I am proud of the fact that apart from when she was on public display meeting President Mandela, we managed to contrive to prevent the photographers from getting a single picture of her. That meant a lot to Diana, and to me. Notice how the speaker evokes the feeling of private family moments, even when he's describing one of the world's most public figures. In just a few lines, we really get a sense of what Diana's feelings were, and of her brother's feelings as well. Again, this is only a short section in a much longer talk, but without it, the talk would be much less powerful. The ability to create an intimate connection with the audience has always been a hallmark of great speakers. To appreciate this and to learn how to do it yourself, you need to understand that a great speaker is always talking to only one person, no matter how vast the audience might actually be. Think of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who began making a series of radio broadcasts to the nation shortly after his first election. This was in 1933, during the worst of the Great Depression. The country really needed leadership, but leadership with a gentle touch. Even the title that Roosevelt gave to his radio programs, they were called Fireside Chats, showed the president's genius for giving a human scale to a very large enterprise. First and most important, FDR visualized his audience as individuals, never as a mass of people. He knew his audience was hearing him one person at a time, so he spoke to them as if he were talking to a single person. This is something you absolutely must do in order to create a personal connection. You should literally visualize a single person who, in your mind, will represent the whole audience. Make up a story about that person's life. What are the challenges and the opportunities? What are the wants and the needs? The more specific you are about your listener, the more you will be able to connect. Do you know the color of their eyes? What are they wearing? Where do they live? What is their education? What is their financial status? There are dozens of questions like this, and you should have answers for all of them. Assure yourself that your imaginary listener is receptive to your message. It's someone who is sympathetic to your cause and who has come to you for help. No matter how large your audience might actually be, even if it's a media-generated audience of thousands of people, speak to this one single person. With practice, you will learn to transpose the face of your prototype onto literally any group of listeners. Roosevelt himself sometimes imagined that the imaginary person was sitting with him on a porch or at a dinner table was even better. This visualization created a feeling of intimacy and trust. Even though he was speaking into a radio microphone, his tone of voice and his facial expressions were those of an intimate friend. The fact is, a frown on your face will make your voice sound harsh and cold, but a smile will make you sound warm and inviting. The president's face would light up as if he were actually sitting beside the fireplace with his listener. People sensed this, and it created a powerfully affectionate bond. As he spoke, FDR's hands would move in simple, natural gestures. Most people think that good communication depends on the mouth, but that's much too limited. A powerful communicator uses his or her entire body. By using these techniques, you create a setting in which emotions can be shared naturally and gracefully. You've created the basis for the kind of self-revelation that is a hugely valuable element of good public speaking. By the time you're done with your presentation, your listeners should really feel as if they know you. They don't have to know everything. It's always a good idea to let people use their imagination to some extent, but many of the basic facts should be shared. Where did you grow up? What was your family like when you were a child? What is your family like now? Are you single or married? If you have children, sharing a story about them is a great opportunity for connection with all the other parents in the audience. I think you can see that using stories effectively is a complex process. You need to be intuitive, but you also need to be rational. You need to balance genuine emotion with correct decisions about how to use it. You need to be sincere, but you also need to be smart. By arousing your own emotions as a speaker, you can bring out the same emotions in your audience. But all this must happen within certain basic tactical guidelines. These are like the net on a tennis court. They're the limits that give meaning to the emotional content of your speech. Without a net, a great serve in tennis isn't a serve at all. It's just somebody hitting the ball really hard. In the same way, emotional stories in a speech need to have a rational context and organization. More on this in a moment. Let's look at some key tactics that should always be employed, regardless of how emotionally engaging your presentation might become. In all public speaking, and especially in the storytelling aspect, you are constantly making choices. You're making emotional choices, but you're also making rational decisions about, for example, using one word rather than another. These are not always easy decisions, and many speakers unfortunately make the wrong ones. When it comes to choosing your words, two rules are absolutely essential. The first is economy. That means using the fewest number of words in order to say what you want to say. If you have a point that can be made in a sentence of 10 words, don't use 20 words to do it. Don't even use 12 words. In fact, see if you can find a way to use only 8. Anything that contributes to a muddy, convoluted sentence needs to go. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is lose phrases you really like, but if they don't directly contribute to your main theme, you do need to lose them. None of this is especially surprising. You probably heard the same advice from your third-grade English teacher, but here's something you probably didn't know. But it's something you should never forget if you intend to be a high-impact speaker. You need to use the fewest number of words in a sentence because you will have to repeat a variation of that sentence at least twice or even 3 times. This is a basic difference between written and spoken language. If you are writing a book, your words are fixed on the page for readers to see. If they don't understand exactly what you mean, they can and should read the words again. But a live audience doesn't have that option. Your words are there for an instant and then they're gone. There's no playback in real-time speech. So whether it's a description in a story or a point of information elsewhere in your talk, you must find a way to convey the same message more than once. And you must also do it in the most concise and hard-hitting way. That's why the fewest number of words in any given sentence is absolutely the way to go. But that's just the beginning. You should not only use the fewest possible words, but also the simplest possible words. Overestimating the vocabulary of your audience is a big mistake because you risk losing their attention immediately. When Ronald Reagan, known as the Great Communicator, addressed Mikhail Gorbachev, he didn't say, "Comrade General Secretary, in this instant, I demand that this geopolitical mortar and metaphorical hindrance be retracted." He said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Keep that example in mind, and you'll never have problems with the level of your vocabulary. Whenever you tell a story or share personal information about yourself, be sure that the connection to the overall theme of your speech is very explicit and will not offend even one member of the audience. There are several reasons for this. It's possible, for example, that your stories are so engaging that listeners will forget the real purpose of your talk. Or if there's something less than engaging, the audience may simply lose focus. So maintain connection to your theme through emphasis and repetition at appropriate moments. When Martin Luther King spoke at the Lincoln Memorial, he repeated one sentence, "I have a dream." This was the real theme of his speech. Even if we're not certain about what he said in between, we remember his repeating that theme again and again. This was his basic point, and he made sure that it would not be forgotten. Here's something else that's very important to keep in mind. Whenever you have an opportunity, use props of one kind or another. Hold something up for the audience to see. Play a brief recording or project an image onto a screen. Remember show and tell in grammar school? Tell was almost always the boring part. What we wanted was to actually see the pet turtle. So give your audience something beyond the experience of just listening to your voice. Even if you don't have a turtle to show them, you can use gestures and body language to add a visual dimension to your talk. Use physical energy to show that you yourself are interested in your topic. Don't just stand there. Make your speech a visual as well as an audio experience. This is the difference between reading a speech and true public speaking. Watch your ums and uhs. Most people don't realize how often these wasted syllables intrude on their oral communication, especially when they're speaking in front of an audience. Basically, and are expressions of nervousness. They're unconscious ways of buying time because you're not absolutely certain of what you're going to say next. So the more prepared you are, the less nervous you'll be and the less you'll need to stall. You should always speak warmly, but your voice should also convey focus and deliberation. Oprah Winfrey is one of the best in the world in this respect. She always seems interested, excited, but focused and under control, and the effect is to make the audience feel exactly the same way. There's so much to say about getting the audience on your side, and this one session could be an entire program all by itself. We've spoken about the need to communicate the basic themes and information of your talk, and we've also discussed the importance of creating an emotional connection with the audience. We've seen that there are two essential ways of doing this, both of which must be woven into your speech. The first is stories about other people. The second is shared information about yourself. These are your tools for winning the respect and affection of your listeners. We've also discussed practical tactics for maximizing your impact, such as choosing the right vocabulary and employing eye-catching visual aids. But all these are really a means to an end. Any good speaker wants more than just the attention and affection of the audience. A good public speaker wants to inspire action. Exactly how to do that is the topic we'll explore next. So please join me for Session 6. As a public speaker, what aspect of your presentation would you most like to strengthen? Would you like to impart your ideas more clearly? Or do you want to touch the emotions of your listeners more deeply? But before you choose your answer, let me ask one even more important question. As a speaker, why do you want to have greater intellectual or emotional impact? In fact, why do you want to be a speaker in the first place? And this time, there's no need to respond at all, because the answer is obvious. You want to move your listeners to action. You intend for them to make something happen based on what they've heard. You don't want them to say, "That was a lovely speech." You want them to say, "Let's march." There are really only three basic reasons why a speech or presentation is given in public: to inform, to entertain, or to inspire action. Moreover, inspiring action is by far the most frequent, the most important, and the most challenging motive. Bringing about action on the part of your listeners is not a matter of blind luck, nor is it simply a talent that certain speakers have and others lack. It is a skill that can be learned and mastered. Furthermore, there are intelligent, clearly defined methods for learning that skill, as you're about to discover. The first step is gaining the interest, the attention, and the confidence of your listeners. We've spoken about this in earlier sessions. Unless you achieve those basic goals, especially winning the confidence of the audience, listeners can have no faith in what you say. The best way to win confidence is to show you deserve it. In an oral presentation, this means more than just deploying lots of facts and figures. Regarding this, Dale Carnegie liked to quote J. Pierpont Morgan, one of the wealthiest men in the world at the start of the 20th century. Morgan said that just as character was the biggest element in obtaining credit from a bank, the perception of your character is also crucial for obtaining the confidence of an audience. You've probably noticed this yourself. Glib, witty speakers are not nearly as effective as those who are less brilliant but more sincere.